you're having a beautiful weekend here, getting an opportunity to relax and recharge on this beautiful Sunday. Get your drinks, get your popcorn, get comfortable, relax. We are going to get into some things here today, and we're going to be talking about Hulk Hogan, the titan, the icon of professional wrestling. He recently passed away, and in light of his passing, TMZ has done a documentary to talk a little bit about his life, his legacy, and of course, some unfortunate controversy that did happen during his life. So we got to explore it all because it all sums up the man. So we're going to talk about his contributions to wrestling, how his peers felt about him, pretty much his contribution to the sport and the industry itself, because I think it is undisputed that he is one of the most important wrestlers in history. And in my personal opinion, if it was not for him and Vince McMahon, and I do believe that the two needed each other to be successful, if it was not for those two, professional wrestling would not be what it is today, and stars such as The Rock and John Cena would not have the careers that they have outside of wrestling if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan opening that door and showing you something different. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the TMZ Presents The Real Hulk Hogan documentary that recently came out, stick with me and we'll go over it part by part, scene by scene, and we're going to talk about everything that was discussed. But before we get into that, if you are not familiar with me, my name is Aries Rose, and welcome to Aries Rose TV. On this channel, we talk about movies, streaming shows, TV shows, world news, local news, politics, celebrity news. Basically, anything I find interesting, I come on and discuss with my Aries crew. If you are on Instagram, follow us there, Aries Rose TV. Let us know you are from YouTube and we'll follow you back. It's another way to connect with the channel. We use Instagram a lot. And if you are a subscriber here on YouTube, you can talk with me on the communities tab. You can leave questions, discussion items, things you want me to cover on the channel, or trends or topics, breaking news, things you want me to know. You can post that over in the communities tab. So if you are not a subscriber, go ahead and hit that subscription button. We'd love to have you part of the Aries crew. We have fun over here. And then make sure you hit that notification bell so you can find out every time I go live, post videos, post in the communities tab, and all that good stuff. And we do have a leaderboard here on this live. So as you post comments, come on in and we will give you a shout out. Thank you so much for the support. Let me know if you are a returning Aries crew by leaving hashtag Aries crew in the comments. If you are a first time watcher, the first time watcher in the comments, I want to give you a shout out for stopping by. So let's get into this Real Hulk Hogan documentary that you can find on Hulu. And this is a TMZ Presents documentary here. And it opens up with Harvey Levin learning that Hulk Hogan has passed away, and he passed away on July 24th, 2025. To me, it kind of came suddenly, but I think when you kind of look back, and especially in looking back and how he was looking in those later months, it kind of seemed like it was going in that direction. But Hulk Hogan always came off as this larger than life, immortal character that, to hear him passing was kind of like thinking, wow, I didn't even ever really consider that was going to happen, let alone happen at all when it did. So it was pretty shocking and surprising. And it looks like either his team, or I'm not sure what these people's roles were, but it looks like it's like in the TMZ headquarters when they're having their show where they frequently film that at. That's where it looked like it was taking place. And then when he gets the news that Hulk Hogan had passed away, he makes a call to somebody, but it's not clear who he called, saying, have you heard anything about Hogan? Is there any way I could possibly talk to him? And, then it's confirmed that he's passed away. So his staff tells him that they have 135 words written up about him. Can they post it? And he's like, post it. And then it kind of pans to Harvey just looking at the computer screen, looking at the article that they had just put up about Hulk Hogan's passing. And then it goes to Vince McMahon. So it was nice to see Vince McMahon in this particular documentary because I do think Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan is like peanut butter and jelly. One can't really be without the other. And I think they're both so critical to building each other up in the success of the professional wrestling industry that, it was kind of weird to see him not being included in some of the tributes that were being made to Hulk Hogan because they were so closely aligned with each other. So it was nice to see him on here getting a chance to talk about it. And he was asked, what went through your head when you heard that Hulk had passed away? And he said, shock. You don't think about a family member or someone close to you dying. And he talked about how Terry had, so to speak, kicked out of a lot of different surgeries. So, I mean, wrestlers have a super physical sport where they are throwing their bodies into each other, onto the mats, into those ropes. They're landing on each other, tossing each other around. So they beat up their bodies for entertainment. So, that takes a wear and tear. When you're younger, it's probably maybe not as worse, although I'm sure it still hurts. But the older you get, the harder those things are because your body starts to wear down and everything you did younger kind of builds up to when you get older. So he had to have a lot of different surgeries on his back, his hips. I think later on I was hearing that he had neck surgery just before he had passed away. So they say numerous surgeries. I want to say he said like 20 or so surgeries that he's had, and a lot of, he said his body, had just become artificial essentially from replacements from how much wear and tear he had on his body. So, he just said that, or then it goes to Sylvester Stallone, who had cast Hulk Hogan way back in the beginning of his career in Rocky 3. He talks about, how his passing was probably not just because it, at this point, has been known that he had a heart attack. It wasn't just the heart attack, that it was a culmination of everything over the years that he had done to his body and everything that was happening. And I kind of tend to agree with that. The heart attack may have been what caused it, but that probably happened based on everything else that was going on in his life, age, some other factors as well. And Harvey was talking about how he passed from a very mortal thing, but you kind of think of him as this larger than life, almost godlike character, because that's how Hulk Hogan was presented, especially in the 80s when he initially really made his biggest mark in the sport that I feel like cemented his immortality, whether he's physically here or not. And I thought the same thing. You would just think it might be something else. And I don't want to say a heart attack is ordinary because I certainly don't want to get one or have anybody else I know experience one. But that was kind of Harvey's wording for it. And I thought, that same thing, they did a really good job of marketing Hulk Hogan is something more than human. And that persona, that character is, but the person who plays him is very human. So I think that moment for all of us, especially those who grew up with him as a kid, collided like, wow, he's human, he's mortal, and he's gone. But 71 years is still a really nice run for a wrestler, especially considering some of them didn't make it past their 40s or their 30s. A lot of well-known wrestlers. Let's take a few moments here for some comments. We got PUBG Legend up. Welcome. John, welcome. Yeet J Uso, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. And let's get back into it here. So we got Mick Foley, who was also on here, who I didn't realize was particularly close or friendly enough with Hulk Hogan to be on here talking about him, but I know they were in the same industry relatively around the same time. And Mick Foley was talking about the negativity that has been discussed after Hulk's passing, which of course stems back to the X tape that came out. And on there, when he was talking with the person that this tape was made with, he used some very racially colorful language that people had never heard from him before, and it really threw off a lot of people and left a bad taste in their mouth. And since his passing, that has come back up again naturally because it is a part of his story. It was one that was very big at the time that it had come out. And I want to say it was Gawker that had released this X tape. And I'm not sure if they released the discussion that took place before the actual X tape activity, but that whole thing really left a mark in his career, and it changed the way a lot of people felt about Hulk Hogan. And some people, weren't willing to let that go, even if he had passed away. So Mick Foley talked about that, and I can understand from his perspective because he probably knows Hulk Hogan in a different way being in the industry, working with him directly, but you also can't control once you say things and it gets out there how it's going to make people feel and how they respond to it. So I just think it's one of those, either you're going to forgive him or you're not, and there's no real in between, whether a person is here or not. I guess it doesn't change the deeds that you did when you were here on earth, but I see both perspectives for sure. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments. And let me know who your favorite wrestler is of all time. Is it Hulk Hogan, The Rock? Is there some other Randy Macho Man Savage? Who is your favorite wrestler of all time? I'm curious to see if it's from the new school or the old school. And let's see here. Goldberg, who was on here as well, that I did not know was very friendly with Hulk Hogan, but I guess they had a relationship as well, says that no one left more of an indelible mark on their chosen profession than Hulk Hogan. And I agree with that. Maybe the person who walked on the moon would be another one I'd put up in that category there, because that was a pretty big deal. But I would say Hulk Hogan in general is one of those people that, whether or not you watch wrestling or like wrestling, you've heard of him, you know him in some form or fashion, and you can recognize seeing him. And I think that's a sign of a superstar, when you can go outside of what it is that you work in or your sport, and people still know you without having any affiliation with that sport or watching that sport. That's how big of a person he was. And he got huge in a time before there was Instagram, Facebook, social media, those types of ways of promoting. That was just good old fashioned hard work, traveling all the time, probably having a very hard work grind. That's what they said in the Mr. McMahon documentary. Jimmy Hart said they worked 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. So, and they had to travel around the different cities, countries, I believe, as well. So that was all word of mouth or the pay-per-view when they were doing TV or doing pay-per-view, like WrestleManias and those types of things. That's how he built his name, and by their association with MTV and larger stars that were popular at that time in the 80s when professional wrestling really broke out. And so that was built up without having platforms where you could potentially reach millions without ever having to leave your home. So that truly tells you the kind of superstardom he had. I'd also put Michael Jackson up there. Honestly, I think he's one of the top entertainers of all time. That's my personal opinion. So I'd put him and Hulk Hogan and the man who walked on the moon in the same places, making large imprints in their chosen professions there that not everybody can say that they can do, even though there's been other wrestlers and other popular wrestlers. There's been other astronauts. There's also been other musicians and entertainers, but they're not all equal to these people who I feel like are the Mount Olympus of their professions. And then it says, so Dave Meltzer was on there, who I believe said it was a wrestling journalist, and he said Hogan became the face of wrestling in 1984. So this is when it was really getting its legs to become what we know it is now. And Mick Foley was talking about how Hulk really understood the connection with the audience. So I think if he came up in a time like this, he would have been perfect for social media, because he was all about close the door. He was all about engagement, and he did a really good job with engaging with his audience and bringing them in and making them a part of the experience. And that's exactly what social media is about. So I think he would have done a great job in this particular era, but he connected on that person to person level where he made you feel like he was talking to you, even though it might have been a crowd of thousands, because he just had that charisma and that ability, that je ne sais quoi, as they say in French. And not everybody has that. And I think, it's a very special thing that certain people have, and he definitely had it for sure. And I think he kept that all the way through his whole life. You could just see the way people um, reacted to him, that he still made them feel really happy and was still able to connect. Um, so Harvey Levin talked about one of the biggest moments in wrestling was WrestleMania 3, and I know that's been talked about a lot, especially since his passing. And WrestleMania 3 is when he wrestled with Andre the Giant. And that's when Andre the Giant kind of passed the torch on to Hogan to be the next superstar. And Mick Foley talked about he believes in moments over matches. And I thought that was an interesting way to phrase that. And he said that the moment that people took away from there was Hulk Hogan slamming Andre the Giant. And Andre the Giant, I want to say, was like 7 or 8 feet tall. If you know, let me know in the comments. He's extremely tall. And they said he weighed about 500 or so pounds. So for somebody to pick him up, that was maybe at that point 200 pounds over what Hulk Hogan weighs. I think at his peak he was about 300 or so pounds, and then he's a foot potentially or so taller than you to lift up that person. Even when I watch it today, you can just see the stark difference in their size and height. And I'm thinking, I don't know how you picked him up, because I would have been struggling just attempting to kind of lift. But whichever way that ended up working, I could see why that was such a huge moment, because probably half the people were like, how did you do that? And the other, I was like, that's amazing. That's where he probably got that superhero strength kind of lore from, was being able to do that. And it was a good TV moment. It's all about making good TV moments, good matches, and that was definitely one of them. And then it goes into the heel turn when he went from Hulk Hogan wearing the red and the yellow colors to, and he was, I guess, what they consider in that industry a baby face when he was wearing those colors, over to Hollywood Hogan during his run with WCW and the NWO New World Order that he was in with Scott Hall and Nash. Is it Steve Nash? I can't remember his name, but those three together were the NWO, or at least the original foundation of the NWO, and that just kind of came and the shook up the wrestling world, because nobody expected Hulk Hogan to turn into a heel. Like, that kind of caught everybody off guard. And they talked about how it was a big risk, because when you change what people like about you, what people are drawn to, or what made your popularity, and then you switch into something else, you are taking a risk. People are not going to come along with you, because after a while, when you're presenting yourself a certain way or doing things a certain way, that becomes you. That becomes what people associate with you. So if you try and go in a drastically different direction, you don't know if they're going to go along with you. But this just goes to prove it was the person, maybe not necessarily the character, because people were still with him even as Hollywood Hogan. Even in that run, people still liked him. They still enjoyed him, and he kind of started a revolution with people switching over to really watching the WCW, which was a challenge for WWE, because they were losing ratings due to how popular that show was, and part of that was Hulk Hogan carrying that organization as well. So he definitely had a gift. And he had a gift of making people want to watch him and knowing how to entertain and making it interesting. Talked about one of the other biggest WrestleMania matches he had, and in my humble opinion, this one was the biggest. This one was like the Clash of the Titans. And I think, and I've gone back and rewatched this match multiple times now, and I still think it's one of the greatest ones that they had, because you're watching two legends who you may never see anybody reach their levels again, because I don't feel anybody has. And John Cena has a respectable career, but John Cena is not on the level of The Rock, and he's not on the level of Hulk Hogan. But he's no slouch either. But I just feel like those two are megastars that broke out in wrestling, and to watch those two wrestle together was truly magic. In the way The Rock handled that and the way Hogan handled that just showed how they were professional they were, because they gave each other time to shine. But I just really love the way The Rock let him have his moments and made sure he connected with the audience, because he knew, as being a Hulkamaniac when he was a kid, how much that means to people. And it was really cool to see him be respectful and encourage that and let him have that. And I just hope when it's time for The Rock to fully hang it up, somebody gives him that same treatment that he gave Hogan, because it was a great match, and it was just a great way to show respect to somebody who left a big mark on the industry that he certainly benefited from for sure. And Hulk Hogan talked about how he was fired when he did the role of Thunderlips in Rocky 3. That was the character that he played. He said that Vince McMahon Sr., who was Vince McMahon's father, and he was originally running what was the WWF at the time, which is now the WWE. He did not believe that wrestlers should be doing movies and be in entertainment. So he fired Hogan for doing it. But Hogan, said he knew, not necessarily in this documentary, but in other things that I've seen him talk about with the Rocky 3 movie, he's like, that's a piece of Americana. He knew how big it was, how much people liked it. He's like, I know I got to do it. And that's good instincts, because doing that opened up that world to a whole set of people who might not have known about it, but now they see you on Rocky and you've created intrigue. And Rocky was a huge movie, and Sylvester Stallone was a huge movie star at the time. So to me, that just made good business sense, and it was a good thing for him as well. And Sylvester Stallone talked about what the experience was like working with him. He said he just had that charisma, his size, his stature, his gestures. He's like, he was just entertainment. And I totally agree with that. Some people are built for it, and he was definitely built for it in the way he connected with people and fed off people and understood how to read people and move with the shift in the vibe of the audience. A pure gift to be that in tune with people. So he definitely carried that energy into the Rocky movie, which then just fed back into the wrestling world, having more interest in lore. And Vince McMahon Jr. understood that, because he seemed to understand the direction the industry was going in and how important it was to branch out, because Vince McMahon Jr. is all about that money, and he saw what was happening. At the time when he was younger, I felt like his ability to forecast and have a vision of what was to come and how to get there was just extraordinary, and that drove the success that him and Hogan had in this industry, because they both understood that and took any opportunity they could to capitalize on that. Vince McMahon said that Hulk set the pace and showed people the opportunities that were available, because prior to that, wrestlers weren't really doing major TV, or they weren't out there in the way that Hulk Hogan was. So he definitely opened that door for that to be more acceptable. It talked about he had the Rock and Wrestling cartoon that had his likeness, and a lot of the early wrestling crew, Junkyard Dog, Roddy Piper. That was a lot of those features in there. I think that was the best time in wrestling myself. And then he was also in a TV show, Thunder in Paradise. I didn't watch that show. I don't think it was on for very long, but I do remember hearing about it. So I vaguely remember it, but it just was not a show that caught my attention. Let me know if you watched Thunder in Paradise at the time it was on. Then he also did movies, The Nanny, Suburban Commando, and I'm sure there were some other ones as well, but those were some of the more notable ones talked about. And Jimmy Hart says that they were best friends. That, like, he did a lot of stuff with Hulk, and I think he was his manager his whole career, maybe, or a big chunk of it. I know they were always together a lot, so I'm not surprised, and I'm sure they rode together or did a lot of things on the road together. So it was nice to hear him talk about that, because Harvey asked, what's Hulk like as a person, and Vince McMahon said they were like brothers, and I'm not surprised, especially if he was working for Vince's dad, so he's probably known Vince for, wow, maybe 40 plus years, 50 years maybe. Um, and they, through that whole time, they had their ups and downs, but they still kept in touch, and they still made magic together. And I think it's a testament to both of them that you can go through things with people, have public breakups, like when he went to go work for WCW, that almost really hurt the WWE and put them out of business. But they still found a way to come back together and work together. And he was able to do a WrestleMania with The Rock, as they say that Vince McMahon is really good about putting his personal feelings aside and thinking about what's good for business. And he helped make a lot of great memories for people in wrestling, because he didn't put that first and realize, okay, we're just going to try to do what the fans want to do. If it turns into green for me, I'll suck it up, and I'm all about that. If you're going to be hurt, or if you're going to have to be around people who hurt you or make you frustrated, at least get paid for it, right? And let's see. Um, They said they may have had verbal spats, but it always worked out. And, they talked about some of the tension they had between each other in the Mr. McMahon documentary. But again, they came out as friends and they always seemed to support each other and work together in the end. And I think that was great. And nobody wanted to see them feuding. They are two legends in this industry, and they are one of but a few that have the history. And now, Vince is probably one of the only ones next to Ric Flair and Bret Hart. That list is getting smaller. People have some of that history of the original days and how it kind of started. So I hope we get more interviews with them to capture that information, because once they're gone, all of that is gone along with them. And Mick Foley talked about his situation that he had with Hogan, where Hogan had made some comments about him on a TV show. And he was saying, and I don't know what prefaced it for him to say these comments, but it just goes into the comments of saying, well, Mick Foley was sleeping, eating cheeseburgers and M&Ms. I was training like I've been doing, I trained for 2 hours. I've been doing for the last 30 years. And, Mick Foley said, it hurt because you want the approval of somebody like Hulk Hogan, who's really big in this industry. He's very important in here. So, his word means a lot. And what he says about you means a lot, and it probably shapes the way people think about you. And he goes, but he said what he said was not true, but at some point he just kind of left it at water under the bridge. And he said the Hulk went out of his way to not only apologize to him, but to apologize to him on camera. And it shows the clip where he said, I want to apologize to you. That wasn't true. It was just me being ignorant. I don't even know why I said that. And I thought that was really cool that he took the time to apologize to him and to apologize to him publicly, because he made negative comments about him publicly. And that was really big of him. Sometimes people just think, if I just leave it alone, it's fine, and then it'll just go away. But I do think that's really cool that he took the time to reach out to him and make it known, I went too far. That wasn't cool, and I'm sorry. And then it goes into his racially colorful comments that he made on the X tape. And, Vince or Harvey was talking about, to Vince about how you let him go. And he was pulled from the WWE at the time for doing that. And Vince was saying, he was kind of, surprised. That didn't seem like him. He was in shock. And Jimmy Hart was saying the same thing, that he had never heard him in all the time that they had been together say any of those things. So he was really surprised for that. And he gives an example of Kamala, I think is the wrestler's name, when he was on the road with them and he had just gotten his check, and Hulk had said, let me see that check, let me see what you got paid. And he said, oh man, this is too small. Apparently called Vince and said, hey man, Kamala's working all these events with me. We got to get him some more money. This check isn't acceptable. And he said the next time he got paid, it was double. And he said, thanks, Hulk. I'm making more money now. So it's allegedly what Jimmy Hart said took place. So he said this is why these comments that he made really surprised me, because he never saw that. But Hulk grew up, I want to say, in Georgia, and he spent time in Florida. This is the South. I'm not surprised that word was used the way it was used, and I'm just not surprised that the word was said. Now, it was not what I ever thought I'd hear out of Hogan's mouth, but understanding where he came from, I'm like, well, you probably, and he said it himself, it was used a lot, and not an excuse for it, but he said he's a product of his environment. So, and Jimmy Hart said he's from Tennessee, so I don't know that may have never been said ever in the entire time that you were together, so much as it may not have rose to the level in your mind of thinking that it's racist, because I think when you hear things enough, you get desensitized to it. And especially if you are not of that ethnicity, I wouldn't expect you to have the same sensitivity level. So I'm not going to use that as a gauge of whether or not he ever said anything like that, because I just don't think that that's true at all. But he has passed away, and you can't really hold it against him. And people say things in the privacy, because in fairness, he was not saying this in public, or not saying it with the intent to be public. He did not realize he was being filmed, which was messed up. I think that was messed up in and of itself, to put somebody in that situation. And people say things that they would not necessarily want said in front of other people, or want other people to know. So to kind of judge somebody else on something, where if the flashlight was turned on you, they may find something that you don't like. You have to be realistic about that. Does it take away from the hurt? No, because I was personally hurt when I heard it, and like extremely disappointed and shocked. Like, wow, you don't have problems taking money from people of color or getting rich off of them, but they're not good enough for your daughter, and this is what you really think of them. That was really disappointing, but he's human. He did apologize for it. We'll take it for what it's worth and kind of move on from that. And Mark Henry said that when it came out, he went to Hulk and Vince McMahon and said, "Hey, I know how to fix this. If you are sincere about it, we should go to historically black colleges, HBCUs, and talk and have a real, have a real sincere apology and talk about what you said, and be willing to go along with that engagement with that." And he said Hulk told him, "Oh, well, I've been advised not to talk about it." And he said, "Well, I think that's bad advice." I don't think Hulk was ready to have that discussion. I don't think he probably could have handled it as well as it may have seemed. I think for him, the way he did it was just probably the best for him, and that's okay. But I do think that that's cool that Mark Henry was willing to put himself out there and was really trying to genuinely make a suggestion on how to help Hulk Hogan improve his image. We'll never know if that would have been beneficial or not, because it didn't go that way, and you won't ever get a chance to do it. But I do think, considering Mark Henry is a person of color, still being willing to help somebody else who said something that he admitted, was hurtful when he heard it himself, I think shows how big of a person he is. And he spoke very respectfully of Hulk without dodging the fact that Hulk did make those comments or how it made him feel, but he still spoke respectfully of his legacy. And I think that's the best way to handle it. We can talk about it. You can say it hurt you because it was a part of his legacy, but what the man did for professional wrestling and entertainment, and how much fun and excitement he brought to my life as a child, and even later on into adulthood, you cannot take that away from him. And I just felt like he did a really good job of acknowledging that and speaking about him in the most professional, positive manner as possible. And let's see, then it goes to his affiliation with now President Trump, speaking at the Republican National Convention, talking about there was an attempt on, at the time, it was former President Trump's life, and he pretty closely aligned the character Hulk Hogan with politics, which you typically don't really see a lot, and really see it all that much in wrestling until really he did it. But that was his politics, and he had a long history with Trump. Trump had a lot of time and years that he had spent with the WWE. He has a strong relationship with Vince McMahon. Linda McMahon is his education secretary, and she, during his first administration, had a position with the small business administration or whatever that they have related to that. So they have a long affiliation with President Trump, and that's, you can go back and look at different times he's appeared on the show and different things that he's done with Vince McMahon to see that history. So I'm not surprised that he was supporting him, because they have a history there. But given the climate that was going on at the time, it was a little bit surprising to align yourself so deeply. But that was his politics. That's how he felt. And it looks like that may have also contributed to the response he got when he came out on the debut of Raw on Netflix on January 6, 2025. As you know, that came up about him getting booed when he came out. And Jimmy Hart said, "Boy, we kind of walked into a firestorm, and California was having none of it that day." Because the more they booed, the harder I was just waving that flag. And I can just remember watching that happen at the time that it did occur, and being shocked that I was hearing such loud boos for Hulk Hogan, and just surprised that it happened in general, because you don't typically hear about Hulk Hogan being booed, and he was in an arena full of wrestling fans, so that's like his fan base. Now, he played it off pretty well, and he kept going with his speech, but people, I wondered, and I'm sure other people wondered, how did he really feel about that? Because this is a guy who fed off of the love and adulation that the audience gave him. So to walk into I guess for all intents and purposes, a hostile environment there, I was wondering how it impacted him too. And Jimmy Hart said he was devastated. And Vince McMahon was saying that it was not set up properly and that he was probably despondent after that happened. And I totally believe that. And considering that happened in January and he passed away in July, about 6 months later, there's a small piece of me that's wondering, did that reception from the audience really like impact his psyche? And it made me think about that because I watched the match he did with The Rock. At this point, I've seen that at least a good 10 times, the WrestleMania one. And before they actually start wrestling, they kind of walk towards each other and they have the moment where they're both turning their heads in opposite directions and just kind of taking in the audience's reaction, because the audience is roaring like crazy. If I'm ever doing a performance that requires audience participation, I want that exact audience because they knew what to do right on the mark, like somebody was like hitting the audience reaction button or something. Like they gave you pops. I'm sure it was probably louder than a monster truck show in that arena because you could feel it through the TV screen on how loud it was in there. Could only imagine what it felt like to them being in person. And Hogan, as he's turning and just like soaking up this audience reaction, he's got a smile on his face. Like you could just see he was in heaven. Because for somebody who was motivated by the crowd liking him and they've always liked and loved him, that probably feels like you're just getting those energy pump ups. And then to walk into that kind of a crowd, probably expecting that same reception and to be booed, I could only imagine that that probably was a hit to his psyche. And I just wonder if that kind of messed with his mind enough that kind of put him in a place that maybe he wasn't as successful with recovering from the surgery that he might have been if maybe he got a different reception there. Not blaming it on that because it probably could have happened whether or not people clapped and cheered for him or booed. It might have been the same outcome, but I just feel like people who are people and feed off people liking them and loving them, once that changes, I wonder if it changes them. And he was talking about in that Mr. McMahon documentary that when he was on trial or there's talks of the trial about steroids, that in the audience he would see signs, did you take your pills today or did you take your steroids today or something like that. And he said the audience has started to turn on him, and that's at the point where he thought he needed to leave. And that's before he went over to WCW and then became Hollywood Hogan. So when the crowd turned on him during that time, at least in his words, the crowd turned on him. He stepped away from wrestling. He decided to retire, at least retire from the WWE. So that's what made me wonder if any of that may have had an impact on his psyche. We'll never know because he's not here to answer that, but I believe it did myself. Um, but Vince McMahon talked about it. It was not set up properly. It was just kind of like, and here's Hulk Hogan. And he's like, he deserves something very, very special, and that's not what he would have done. And I felt like that was fair for him to say that. That made sense. I think he did need a different reception just to kind of haul him out like he was just another person. Didn't really fit for that caliber of a person and for how much he's contributed not only to WWE but the wrestling sport itself. I respect what Vince McMahon said about that. And when they talked about his legacy, what's his legacy going to be? Stallone said he was the father figure of wrestling. I couldn't agree more. And Vince had said one of the things that he would say is that Hulkamania is going to live forever. And he goes, and indeed it is. And I agree with that 1,000% as well. It's going to live forever in the kids that it impacted, like myself, who then passed that on to their kids, and it's going to keep going. So he will essentially always be the immortal Hulk Hogan because his legend will live long past him, live long past me, because it was just that big and that important to the industry that he will always be talked about when you talk about professional wrestling, period. There's no way you can talk about that and not talk about Vince McMahon and not talk about Hulk Hogan. Otherwise, it's not a legitimate discussion. That's just how I feel about that. It was and Vince McMahon says that he was that no other sports figure has been able to transcend their industry in the way that Hulk Hogan has, and I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I think that is a very fair assessment about what he meant to the industry and what he was able to do while he was in it. And Harvey asked, would wrestling be what it is today without Hulk Hogan? And that's a no. And that's a no, because he was so big and so important to the industry that it would be really hard to say that without him making that impact, that it would be what it is today. But let me know your thoughts. This is my review and my thoughts on the TMZ Presents The Real Hulk Hogan documentary that's out on Hulu, so you can see that on there. If you watched it, I definitely want to hear what you think. If you still watch wrestling, let me know who your favorite wrestler is, who the best wrestler is of all time. Let's keep that conversation going. And what's the most iconic WrestleMania or most iconic wrestling match that Hulk Hogan had? Let me know that in the comments. We will be back live on Monday where we're going to be talking about some trending topics. So make sure you have your notifications on so you can join us then. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great